What is going on, everybody? Back with another video. Today I was in my workshop and I was polishing up my knives. This one in particular, the Para 2, and because I'd completely ruined the blade, so I needed to redo the polish and the grinds, and the cutting edge is pretty much completely gone and dinged up. And it got me thinking, what is my perfect everyday carry? And over the years, how have I dialed in the perfect blade shape, the perfect I guess we can even get into handle material and also blade size. And because for a long time, and this is the reason why it got me thinking about it, for a long time the Para 2 has been pretty much the ultimate EDC carry for me. You know, it's lightweight, it's got a relatively thin blade, and it's full flat ground, a little bit of belly, comes to almost a spear point, perfect for piercing and slicing. And you know, for my purposes, you know, this was the perfect EDC. Now for everybody else's purposes, obviously it'd be different. You know, if you're in the military, you need it for self-defense. If you're like chopping down trees a lot or whatnot, you know, your EDC is going to be a lot different than mine. But this is kind of like my own journey into dialing in the perfect EDC carry for myself. So I guess we should always just start right at the Para 2. Now the Para 2 again was the perfect everyday carry for me. I love the size, love the blade steel with the CPMS 30V. You know, a little bit harder for me to maintain only because I suck at sharpening. But, you know, once I get that thing back to the edge, this thing would hold it for a long time. Because, well, here, tell you what, let me just tell you what I normally use a knife for. Pretty much cutting anything, really. But normally it's going to be for food prep, for cutting down cardboard, that kind of stuff. Just the most generic stuff. I use it occasionally in the yard. You know, if I need to cut something, I don't have my pruners handy, I'll just take my knife out and just, you know, prune something off of a bush or something like that, right? So just very, very simple, basic stuff. I never pry with my knife. I always take either a pry bar or a screwdriver, you know, something a little bit more heavier duty than, of course, this thin tip on the Para 2. Now for food prep, it's perfect because I love the slight belly where you can actually kind of, you know, when you're getting down onto the table, you can actually get really low on the table and just kind of slice in. Or you got this tip where you can angle your hand up, or angle the blade up, and then you can, you know, just do like nice thin cuts. And of course for opening packages, this is perfect blade shape. But over the years I've gotten away from the Para 2. And today I was going to discuss a few more other blade shapes. And the other blade shape that I completely went for and fell in love with was the American Tanto shape. All right. Now this is the quintessential American Tanto, which is of course what Emerson is very famous for, where it's just a straight blade and then like a really abrupt secondary blade, if you will. And the beauty of a Tanto tip is that you can actually pry with it to a certain degree. And because you got that secondary tip, which is much like, let's see, much like, I guess this would be a good example, which kind of acts much like a traditional blade where you do have that kind of secondary tip here, but this is a really sharp point right there. And if you just do like draw cuts, this is actually saw right through a good amount of stuff, you know, if you need that extra bit of oomph, you know, and that's in my experience. And mainly used for cardboard, this blade is really good. Now, what I don't like about a Tanto tip is the fact that, of course, all the blade material is at the very tip. So if you do have to do any kind of fine slicing, this is not really the knife for you. Most of the Tantos that I have in my collection that I've seen, actually, they're really shallow grinds, which means that you get this relief grind here that's, you know, starts splitting the material off. But then when it gets to this point, it's so shallow that it starts forcing it, you know, really abruptly, and most of the time it catches. So you have to do this more of a sawing motion. You can't really do very much push cutting with it. Whereas with the full flat ground of the Para 2, I can pretty much just push cut my way all the way through cardboard or whatnot. It'll just cut it just fine. Food prep with a Tanto, completely unnecessary. There's really no point with it. It's not really meant for food prep. I've tried it. It doesn't work very well. All right. If you guys ever try to slice into like a tomato or something with a Tanto, while it does work, it's just not going to be as smooth and elegant as a full flat ground, you know, and thinner blade, obviously. Whereas most of these Tantos are very, you know, thick. For example, like if you got like a more, more of a traditional Japanese Tanto where it's a little less of a harsh tip like the American versions are. It affords a little bit more elegance, but again, you notice how shallow that grind is, that relief grind is. So most of it's going to be split by this, thick blade stock, kind of rather aggressively, and it doesn't really work very well. Now, the Roxa Chi is a bit of an exception because this is like a pocket lightsaber. It is I think it's probably the sharpest knife in my entire collection. But for everyday carry, while it is extremely useful, and they did thin down the tip here, so it could be used for piercing. I don't do much piercing, but it could be used for piercing. At the same time, because of the very shallow relief grind, it isn't as useful as some of the other knives that I'm about to show you on the table. But we'll get back to that. Now your typical drop point blade, which is kind of like this, where there's a very slight drop. Actually, this isn't a very good example. Where can I? Okay, let's. I guess I don't have one on the table. Let's grab this. Oh no, here's one. Sorry, not very prepared here. Benchmade knack lock. Your typical drop point blade obviously is not straight across. This is almost look like it's straight across. But this is not very straight across. Look, the point just drops down almost into kind of a spear, which makes for a more usable knife. Now the knack lock to me was the perfect kind of a EDC pairing knife, if you will. If you have a lot of normal cutting chores, meaning just either cutting paper, light, rope, food prep for this is excellent because it pretty much almost just looks like a paring knife. Very high, flat ground, and it was just very awesome, very lightweight. Thing is, if you have any other kind of harder chores for it to do, this thing's not going to cut it. Okay, bad joke. So this is a very, very good knife for just piercing. If you need to get into the middle of some material and then slice your way down, this is a very good knife for it. Again, full flat, and while this is relatively thick behind the edge, it's still a much better slicer than, of course, the Emerson. What is this called? The Endeavor? I don't remember what it's called. It's a very cool knife, and at the same time, it's a little bit heavy for its size, really. I mean, this is like solid. There's no milled out anything in this knife, but very cool nonetheless. And it was a favorite of mine to carry for a little while. Finally, I had to retire it and clean it off, and it's now in storage. The other, here's a nice example of a drop point, spear point knife. The Emerson Sheepdog. Again, very useful, and because you got this really nice belly here, you can actually, when you're cutting through the material while you're here, you can actually just saw through it like this, right? But when you first get into the material, you got this point here that allows you to kind of draw into the material and cut. So it's very useful. But again, because of the shallow grind, it's very unusable for food prep, more or less. And cutting some cardboard, this knife will catch just because it's so thick. You split the cardboard, gets to here, and then all of a sudden it's being aggressively pushed apart by the stick blade. So we'll talk about spear points. Spear point, now there's two styles. There's a spear point and then there's a dagger point. The dagger points are more or less just kind of like one piece, flat, and they're grounded on both sides sometimes. A spear point is pretty much a flat ground or a hollow grind on both sides, and there's a spine in the very middle of it, and it's like perfect for piercing. This kind of style, it's useful, and specifically this knife, with this nice thin hollow grind, is perfect for slicing, and you don't have to really angle your blade down very far to get to the tip if you need to use it for food prep or anything like that. But these knives are more purpose-built, and they're really meant for stabbing, really. There's really no other reason for these knives other than the stabbing and the stuff. And for my daily uses, I don't do much stabbing, so I really don't have a use for these. So I don't have very many spear point, dagger point blades. Again, just no use for them. So now, then I went into kind of like multi-purpose blades. And when I mean multi-purpose, the blade has a specific shape, but it has multiple kind of compound grinds, if you will, sort of, in a way. Whereas, for example, this Allen Foltz Custom here, this is a very, very slight recurve on here. The recurve hits a point and then it has a very slight belly, and so it's almost like a recurve. Well, it's a recurve tanto, harpoon shape. I could do without the harpoon part of it, but it's very good for actually penetration, and plus the with the recurve, when you're cutting, when you're drawing back, this part aids in cutting, which is very useful, and I really come to like that, you know. And of course with this knife in particular, because a lot of the blade stock's in the very tip here, when you first start penetrating in, while it is relatively thin and it cuts with ease, it is a little bit thicker in the tip, and it's mostly like this Marty Young here as well, where a lot of the blade stock's in the tip, so getting that first penetration is going to be a little bit harder than say, for example, your Para 2, which just goes right in as if everything was made of cheese. So, but recurves are very nice. On the Marty Young, we got a really long, you know, recurve, pretty much the exact, almost the entire blade before it gets to the tip. On the Marty Young, the recurve actually stops pretty gradually right here, and then there's a really nice belly, which when you go to cut and you do this kind of motion with it, it's perfect for that. But I don't really have that kind of motion going on. I don't really use it. I don't skin anything, you know. For most of my tasks, it's pretty much just, you know, cutting through like this. While this for food prep is really nice, the blade is a little bit too thick for that as well, unfortunately. So, and that kind of leads me into like size of EDC. Now, I used to love larger knives. We're talking like, you know, 4 inches, but you know what? This is really impractical. This is the Greg Lightfoot Full Contact Fighter. This is like one of the most awesome slicers. I mean, it pretty much rivals the Para 2 in certain ways. But the problem is this is so thick, and while you first get into it, it cuts really well until it hits this flat here, and then everything else just goes bad. So I might find that the most useful part of this knife is cutting up here, where it's slightly, ever so slightly thinner right here. Now this is a very interesting recurve. Almost a, I don't know what you would call this, but it's a drop point. There's a recurve on it. It's not really like a tanto point, because you don't have like that kind of secondary tip, so to speak, because the entire blade is a hollow grind, you know, and you can see that it is a hollow grind right there. Whereas, you know, you can obviously tell let's see, where's a flat ground blade here. You can always tell a flat ground blade by the way the light bounces off of it. So, but again, back to the cutting. The long recurve is excellent when you're drawing back the knife after the initial cutting, and then you can just kind of saw your way down to whatever you're cutting with it, right? It's great. But this is just an impractical size. And after a while, I found that even like at the, for example, the 3.5 inch mark is also getting a little too large for me. It's weird because I love large knives, but you know, the 4 inch mark is just, or 3.75 and 4 inch marks, which I think this is a 3.75 if I'm not mistaken. And I don't remember, I think the tilt is actually a little bit over 4. So let's just say it's about a 4 inch around there. 4 inches is extremely just unwieldy and, you know, uncomfortable for me to carry every day, and really no purpose to it for me personally. All right. So I stopped carrying these larger knives. In fact, I go for the smaller 3.25 size, much like the Curtis F3 here, and also the Boker Federal. Now, since I got these two out, now you notice the Curtis F3, I did not opt to go for the drop point design. I went for the more sheep's foot. Now, the sheep's foot is an awesome everyday carry, simply for the fact that, you know, if you're like me, you do a lot of food prep. I mean, it is awesome. It's almost like a chef's knife. The only drawback is this has a flipper, so it doesn't allow me to go all the way to the table because I keep on bumping into the flipper. But I like this little choil here, and cutting through cardboard, unfortunately with this, is a pain in the butt because it's so thick. I mean, much like the Federal, it's just slightly thinner than the Federal in terms of thickness, but that's the problem, is it's so thin down here. But then once you get up to this relief grind to where the flats are, it just wants to push that cardboard like really aggressively apart very quickly, and it just catches, and then you have to do the sawing motion and they get stuck. So this is not practical in terms of thickness. Now, had this been any thinner, or maybe they made like a full flat ground version of this, or maybe a higher hollow ground, maybe like relief, start the relief edge up here, this would be an ultimate slicer. The only drawback to the sheep's foot design is that, well, this specific sheep's foot design is that there's not much piercing involved, so or piercing ability. So if you want that piercing ability on a sheep's foot, you're gonna have to go with something like this, where the point weld is kind of like so. This blade on my first impression video is more like a modified sheep's foot, where it goes down. Then it's a reverse tanto, and then you got like a little bit of an upswept edge. So it's good for as I found it, for piercing. All right, but this has a straight edge on here, so you're gonna do a lot more sawing. And I mean, push cutting is nice, but you're gonna have to get a little bit side to side motion or front and forward motion to actually get to start going sometimes, And because how thick it is, I think it's about the same thickness as the F3. Material happens to catch, just not as bad as the F3, since this is a full flat ground, but it's a relatively shallow flat ground. So now back to size. Now I've carried these two, and I have not reviewed them yet, which I'm about to. The Terzola, Fox Knife Terzola here on my left hand, is a little bit more comfortable carry. It's slim, it's trim, it's really nice, and for normal, when I say normal, just like average daily carry, this will do it. The Whisper is very stylized, and it has a trailing point blade, where the blade is not straight, but it's not a drop point where it drops down. It curves ever so slightly up, almost like a Persian style blade. I don't have one to show you. And it's nice, and cutting through cardboard, you can hold it and you can slice down. It's very cool, and it slices just fine because of high full flat ground, and the blade is relatively thin again, full flat ground, almost a full flat ground. I'm sorry, to the tiny little flats here. It is a nice slicer. The unfortunate bit is that when you're using this for food prep, I mean, you're getting it onto the table, and then you're stopping here. You're gonna need the point to open a box or something. You're really angling the blade point down to kind of get to where the tape is on the box. Food prep, you can just go like this, but you'll never get to use that point because it's so awkward, which is why these kind of knives are a little bit better for food prep, and of course. Definitely your more traditional sheath foot designs are much better for food prep. So, and then let's see what else I got on the table. So while we're on the subject, now this is a kind of a sheath foot blade with a slight curve. Now this is a more traditional reverse tanto design, and this is like excellent. It's basically a pocket box cutter is what it is. Straight kind of like straight razor design with a very abrupt tip on it. This one is a horrific slicer in many ways. Now, opening boxes, this is perfect. Actually, most of anything on the table will do something simple like that. Slicing through cardboard, this is horrific. I'll tell you why. Because of how thick this is. Okay, yes, he thinned it out, on the top, but then you get this extra material here. You can see it perfectly right here, how thick that is. So you got this material here that starts splitting the cardboard or whatever you're cutting. It gets up to here and it gets caught. So it's really, really bad for that matter. But I mean, I'm not really too sure what the intended purpose of this knife is. It is a fun carry, but it's overly heavy and overly built. But it is very interesting. Food prep with this thing, a little bit better, but again, if you have anything thicker than this relief grind, it's going to start catching and start ruining the stuff you're cutting into in terms of for the food. So kind of highly impractical, really, this blade shape, at least on this knife is. Now, actually, I better go grab this. So actually, if you get a reverse tanto that's a little bit more shallow, and this is really, really shallow, this is a little bit better for food prep and opening boxes. And this is the Quartermaster Doc Brown. It's just you get a little bit of stabbing ability, penetration, what have you, and of course food prep. You're just going to be, slicing through like this. But most of the time, I find that having a little bit of a belly is probably going to be a lot better than having a straight edge right there. So again, highly impractical in certain uses. Now then you come to, like, for example, the Spanto grind, which Rikinder is very famous for. This is probably one of the more usable blade shapes ever, because I mean, it's drop point. You got your point nearly, more or less down toward the cutting surface, and a nice slight little belly for cutting. Now, had this been a thinner knife, it would be a superb slicer, but because it is so thick, and of course the flat ground is more or less shallow. It doesn't really cut very well through cardboard. Food prep, forget about it. It's really not that great. But for just normal tasks, this is an excellent knife right here. So now we come down to what I think is like the perfect everyday carry in my mind. So now again, this is a very thick blade. Now this was a very good carry, and it still is to a certain extent, but because of the very thick blade, it was not very practical in terms of what I needed it for. Tanto styles, very awesome, but again, not very practical. So I've come to a conclusion that my everyday carry would be something of this size right here, 3.5 inches, but with a multi-use blade. So again, this is really what I like carrying right here. Maybe not this knife in particular, but this specific kind of a blade shape. So what I have here is a hollow grind, and on the Boker we also have a hollow grind. Now you can see the obvious blade thickness. So now on the Kirby Lambert Inferno, you got a thin tip, or a thinner tip, with these swedges taken out, good for piercing large amounts of belly, and a recurve. So you got penetration, you got draw cutting, and you know, if you need to get like a part of the cutting edge to the table, you got it without having to angle your hand too much. Don't think about it as opening boxes where you gotta go, you know, like this to kind of get the tip into the box. But other than that, this is excellent for the all-around slicer. I mean, it's relatively thin enough that it doesn't really catch. And if you didn't want the full thickness of the blade, start your cutting down here somewhere. And it actually is, it thins out considerably down here. So now, if this was in more of a 3.25 arena, meaning this size here, this would be awesome. So I think in a lot of ways this is the ultimate blade style and carry for me. And this is after years of using, you know, obviously you can tell I have a ton of knives, and this has afforded me the best results so far in terms of an overall everyday use kind of a knife. Para 2 is very awesome, but there are certain things that the Para 2 just didn't really excel at, you know. But overall, if I was to recommend two styles of blade, it would probably be the Para 2 with the full flat ground. If you want that slicing ability, this is it right here. You want something with a little tiny bit more strength and a little bit more slicing ability, it'd be somewhat of a similar blade shape as this. Now, the only other thing I can think of would be the, like, for example, the Emerson CQC15 that has a Tanto tip and a recurve. In fact, I got one, hang on. Okay, here it is. So you would have very similar here, except now you got extra strength at the tip here. And so if you ever need to pry with it, it's a good pry tool to a certain point. The only problem is the very shallow flat ground, which means that most of your stuff will get caught right here, especially if you don't keep your knives sharp. So if this was any higher, meaning like if they moved the relief edge a little taller, it'd be a little better. But unfortunately with Tantos, you really can't if you want to keep that material at the tip. So it's kind of a give and take, so to speak. So, all right, well, I think I rambled on long enough. Please leave in the comments below and let me know what your guys' preferred carry is in terms of blade shape and size or whatnot. And I'd be interested in hearing how you came to that conclusion as well. Other comments, just leave it down below. Otherwise, you can send me a personal message. But I hope this has been a good video for you guys. So I'll catch you guys on the next one. Everybody take care and have a nice day.